Hi everyone, I'm Dennis Hale, and I'm excited to be moderating today's Agile Live webinar. So a few notes before we dive into the presentation today. This webinar is planned to last approximately 60 minutes. We'll save time for Q&A period at the end. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode, so to submit a question, please use the chat feature located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll be sending a link to the recording and all the slides. Information for claiming PDU or SEU credits will be sent in the post-webinar email. And finally, we encourage you all to share your aha moments, and I hope there are several of those, and join the conversation during today's webinar on Twitter using #AgileLive, #Safe, and #DevOps. So before we get started, I wanted to start out with this quick poll question. This webinar is going to talk a lot about measurement, so I'm really interested in how you guys are measuring the success of your Agile and DevOps initiatives. No doubt all of these are desired outcomes, but I'm interested in specifically which ones you guys are most interested. So the top one or two that are most important, and if you're not formally measuring success, that's okay. Just pick the ones that you most closely identify with. While that's going on, I think there might be a looks like there's a problem with the poll data. I don't see the numbers come in, so I'm going to skip ahead to the next slide. So back in January of this year, a small group of us from version 1, including Mark Crow, who heads up development here at version 1, Lee Cunningham, who is driving our enterprise agile strategy, and myself, we made a trip to Boulder, Colorado to spend the day with Imbar Oren, Dean and the rest of the gang at Scaled Agile. We were there because Imbar and Dean had been developing some exciting new material, and they wanted to share some of the progress with us. As it turns out, this new stuff they shared would become the basis of SAFe 4.5. And I specifically remember the ride home from that meeting as we all got back in the car. And I remember we were all very impressed with the direction Scaled Agile was heading. And I, in particular, was excited about the work that Imbar and the gang were doing around measurements and DevOps. And since that meeting, we've had a chance to continue our collaboration with the SAFe folks. And as I'm sure many of you already know, Scaled Agile formally released SAFe 4.5 last Thursday. And despite the fact they gave this latest release just half a release point, I think release 4.5 will have a full point's worth of impact, particularly in the world of enterprise DevOps. And so the very good news is instead of me telling you all about SAFe 4.5, we've invited one of the principal contributors, developers, and thought leaders, Imbar Oren, to share the details. Imbar is a SAFe fellow and principal consultant at Scaled Agile. We're really happy to have him on today's webinar. He has more than 20 years of experience in the high-tech market, working in small and large enterprises, as well as a range of roles from development and architecture and executive positions. Imbar's current focus at Scaled Agile is working with leaders at the program, value stream, and portfolio levels to help them bring the most out of their organizations, build new processes and culture. So, Imbar?
Hey, Dennis, thank you so much. I remember that conversation. You were just thinking of some of the concepts that are going to become the scalable DevOps and continuous delivery concepts in Scaled Agile framework, and you guys provided some great feedback and input to this process. So I'm glad it was also beneficial to you guys. So let's get started. Let's talk a little bit about what we're going to cover today. We have kind of a packed agenda. We're going to talk about what do we mean when we talk about safe, scalable DevOps and continuous delivery approach. And then we're going to talk about how do we measure stuff. This is a metrics webinar. We're going to talk about measuring exploration, integration, deployment, release, and then the overall continuous delivery pipeline. So let's get started. What do we mean when we talk about safe, scalable DevOps and continuous delivery approach? Safe, we've been working on Safe for a while now, and with 4.5, we're looking at it safe for lean enterprises. We have over 120,000 people trained Safe. We have 120 partners. 70% of the U.S. Fortune 100 enterprises are using Safe. And we're seeing in the case studies a lot of success. We were trying to push this further. We wanted to see where we can go and how far we can actually help our customers achieve, which is why Safe 4.5 came to be. I hope you've all had a chance to come in and today and look at the framework site. It's at scaledagileFramework.com. But 4.5, while being backwards compatible to 4.0 and very similar in some cases, is also very different. And I don't know, Dennis, you were seeing it in somewhat of the nascent stages of it. When you were seeing the full thing, what's the first thing that struck you?
Well, really the first thing that struck me when we got together in January, it's I've got a DevOps background and a DevOps perspective, so I was really excited about the level of thought and detail you put into including kind of merging DevOps and Agile. In the past, it's kind of been DevOps has played a smaller role. So kind of acknowledging that the part of that value stream that DevOps supports is critical. That was the first thing that I think I noticed.
Cool. It's no doubt that DevOps and continuous delivery play an important role in 4.5. Even in the image that you see in front of you, you can really see the prominency of the continuous delivery pipeline, as well as the real estate we've engaged with DevOps. And that's because we think it's an important aspect. We see DevOps as something that's supporting the entire flow of value. Now, a lot of people, when they look at DevOps, they mainly think about the automation aspect of it, and we're going to talk about automation. But we've taken some of the things that's been out there in the industry with common comms, and we've focused on what's important, we think, in a scaled enterprise, and we call it a calmer approach to DevOps. And it all starts with culture, and we're going to finish with culture in the last measurement slides. But it starts with a culture of shared responsibility and really talking across the organization, development, through operations, through security. Everybody who's building anything needs to be part of this. Then there's automation. And automation is, of course, very important, making sure you automate the entire delivery pipeline. But Dennis was just talking about the merging of Agile and DevOps. We were seeing a lot of problems with our customers who were trying to see some of their executives talking about, should I be doing DevOps? Or should I be doing Lean? Or should I be doing Agile? Can I just do DevOps? Can I just do Agile? You can't. You need to merge the concepts together. So when we were talking about a calmer approach to DevOps, Lean flow is an important part of it. If you're building things in large batches, but you have a very advanced continuous deployment automation, but you're still developing in large batches, it doesn't help you. And then measurement, which we're going to spend all of our time on today. And finally, recovery. If we want to release more often, we need to be able to recover, and both with rollbacks and fix forwards, and we need to also monitor this, so we're going to talk a little bit about measuring these as well. And the central thing in the big picture, in New 4.5 big picture, is this hypothesis-driven continuous delivery pipeline. When we're looking at continuous delivery, a lot of people are just focusing on the small detail of, yes, I can continuously deploy. And that's important. But it starts much earlier. We need to look at the complete section of, I need to explore new ideas. What do customers want? I need to integrate those ideas into larger and larger things. And this is beyond just the automation of having a continuous build process or stuff like that. At scale, this is much more. And then continuous deployment, and finally releasing on demand. Well, we want people to be deploying continuously to the production environment. Release has more to do with market need. When do we need to release this? When can we actually start gathering information? And then looking at it as a full loop of hypothesize, build, measure, learn. Everything's a small experiment. We'll try it, we'll see it, and then we'll learn more and improve more. Dennis, does this make sense to you, that new approach that we have here for the hypothesis-driven continuous delivery pipeline?
Absolutely, and I think that sends us into it's a great segue into this next poll question. And the question is, over the next 12 months or so, how critical is it that you guys develop additional performance metrics and visualizations to better describe the flow of business value and quantify bottlenecks across the entire value stream? And I see this poll question is working, which is awesome. And I apologize for the problem we had with the first question. So as the data comes in, as we talk to our customers, there's definitely, I think, and the timing of SAFe 4.5, I think, is perfect, and it dovetails really well. It seems as though there's a lot of focus going forward, a lot of interest in doing a better job of measuring the performance of value streams end to end. And so I'm going to go ahead and it looks like the results are in. I'm going to close this and share the results with everybody. So it looks like, quick math here, it looks like 80% or so of us think that better performance metrics and visualizations are either critical or extremely critical. So I think that dovetails with my experience. Inbar, any thoughts about the results there?
I agree completely, Dennis. I think that we refactored a lot of the information in the metrics article on SAFe. And the reason is a lot of people in the Agile community have, a love-hate relationship with measurements. We want to measure stuff, we want to see success, but on the other hand, we know that there are some limitations to measurement. One of the nice things that DevOps brings to this whole mix is people who do DevOps take measurement as a critical thing. They understand the importance of it. And we need to bring that attitude to everything because it said on the previous slide, measurement of everything. This is critical, and we need to connect things from the business side of measurement to the technical side of measurement and get people more into the understanding that it is critical to actually be measuring performance and success of businesses. So let's dive in. Let's start with this continuous delivery pipeline. Let's start with measuring continuous exploration. This is the start of the talk. And as we're looking at the four elements of a continuous delivery pipeline, continuous exploration is the beginning. I need to have an idea of what I'm building. And as a product manager, I need to be talking to internal people, system architects, POs, teams, business owners, but also to customers. I need to be doing Gemba walks and doing customer visits and elicitation and go to various places in the market and shows and do market research. And I need to understand that all of my cool ideas are just ideas. They're hypotheses. So we put a lot of emphasis here on the lean startup cycle and lean UX cycle. And what this means to us is we need to start understanding that we foster innovation with the lean startup cycle. If I have this idea of an awesome epic, if I have this idea of a great thing to do, I don't know if anybody needs it. Now, sometimes you can just do a very, not even development MVP. Dean was just giving the example that was in Eric Ries's book about Zappos. When they started out, they got orders on the web, and then the owner was buying shoes from a real store, packaging them up, and sending them. But a lot of the time when you're building this MVP, which is a minimal viable product, you actually need to build something to understand, do I need this? Is there a demand for it? Sometimes you can really do it without building tools. Most of the times you can't. So we want to enable our decision makers, whether it's at the portfolio or program level, to take their epic, break them into minimal viable products, build them, integrate them, deploy them, release them, either to all people or some of the people, and we're going to see that later, and then measure it, see if it's actually providing results. If it is, great, let's continue adding features. If it's not, let's stop work. Let's pivot. Let's go somewhere else. And this concept of fostering innovation with the lean startup cycle is crucial to the understanding of SAFe 4.5.
Inbar, you've talked before you move on. Inbar, you've talked a lot with us about a hypothesis and how important it is to be able to measure, to have a hypothesis about the outcome of some experiment in a way that can be measured objectively. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So before we had an epic in SAFe, we had what we called an epic value statement, which is what is an epic for. Well, now we put more input into we're calling it now a hypothesis statement, because we want people to understand that it's important to understand that this is a hypothesis, and then put out how you're going to measure it, both as a lagging thing. Yes, we're going to make $1 million more in our business, or $10 billion more, but more in leading indicators. How are we going to measure it? And then break that into an MVP, a minimal viable product. What is the smallest thing I can actually develop to validate my hypothesis? Not to bring the whole value, not to get everything, just to validate. Is this even a valid hypothesis? So when we started thinking that somebody needs an implementation roadmap, so we started by doing, even before that, essential SAFe. So we started with a blog post. We got a lot of feedback on the blog post, so we turned it into a guidance article. Got a lot of feedback on the guidance article. We made it into a complete, real configuration in SAFe 4.5. But if we released that blog post and people were like, actually, we don't care so much, we would have stopped working on it, pivoted away, instead of investing in something that nobody cared about. This was our minimal viable product. And this is really, again, measuring it, and really measuring it is so crucial, and we're going to talk more about it later. And for example, one of the measurements that we have here is how much hypothesis testing are we doing? The more big batches you have, the more of a non-mature deployment and releasing environment you have, the harder it is for you to actually have an idea, have an hypothesis, and then test it. Actually get it out to the market, test the hypothesis is not easy. We want to see experiments going on more and more. There's a very nice Bing video online talking about their experimentation, and they talk about doing hundreds and thousands of experiments each month, and that's great. We see a lot of companies who have a hypothesis, have ideas, and either don't acknowledge their hypothesis or measure them in once every year, or once every year and a half, or really focusing on lagging indicators. We want to change this. We want more hypothesis tested over time as we're moving on. Have you seen something like this, Dennis?
Yeah, Inbar, I love the fact that you guys are really encouraging us to spend a little bit, to maybe be a little bit more disciplined and spend a little bit more time trying to me, the way that I internalize this is it's important to spend a little bit more time trying to come up with a hypothesis that can be objectively measured. I think in the past it's been a little bit too easy. We spent time coming up with a hypothesis, but we kind of let ourselves off the hook by not really trying to get to a hypothesis that could be measured objectively. And I love that you're encouraging us to go that extra, to spend maybe a little bit more time trying to come up with a hypothesis that can be measured, like increased experiment. That can be objectively measured. You gave the example about feedback from the blog post. That's web page views. That can be objectively measured. Right. So I think that kind of encouragement is going to be good for all of us.
Yeah, we're going to get back to it in the end to actually see how we test those hypotheses. But first of all, let's see how many are we doing and are we improving in this is an importantly crucial part of SAFe 4.5. And then there's continuous integration. Continuous integration is the middle part. So we started talking about continuous exploration. We built a backlog. We have those cool hypotheses. But we can't do anything with them until we have a system. And for us, continuous integration is a lot. Yes, it involves the simple and important concepts of doing continuous integration on the build machine. But it's more than that. on a scaled continuous integration, you actually take those concepts and you say, have I validated them with my stakeholders? Have I shown them early? Have I actually taken this and put it on a staging environment and validated it with a system demo with my stakeholders and with my product management? Have I taken this across a solution with many Agile release trains and integrated at that level? Or am I only doing continuous integration at the team level? It's not enough. That's just not enough. We need this to be higher and bigger and stronger at scale. And as we look at measuring this, a lot of the traditional metrics for continuous integration, they still apply. I mean, then it's stuff like row commit. That matters, right?
Yeah, road commits are definitely a topic that I'm passionate about. For a company that builds software as one of their primary lines of business, the source code is one of the most important assets they have, and far too often we see changes or commits made to that body of code that can't be tied back to some specific business value. And so because of that, and we call those, I think a lot of people call those rogue commits, or commits that can't be affiliated back to a backlog item or to an epic or a feature. And the real downside, other than just the overall, as we move faster, it becomes harder. We need to get better and better at audit and compliance and being able to be really sure about what we have, what changes we made in software. But as I think we'll talk about more in the presentation, if we don't connect every single commit back to business value, it becomes really difficult to track the flow or measure the flow of business value once we've converted our commits into binary objects or into some compiled object. At that point, it becomes really difficult to see how business value moves, and having that association or affiliation between the commit and the business value really simplifies that process of tracking value. So over time, eliminating rogue commits, I think, is super important from my perspective.
Right, I agree. And again, to be fair, for a lot of organizations, we're going to talk about some measurement at scale. For a lot of organizations, even making sure that you track commits to business, or making sure that you're improving your testing, or making sure that you're doing more commits, or making sure that you're actually that you have a build server that's running and building at a normal pace and relatively quickly, and that people and if a build is broken, that's the first priority. Those things are still important. They really, really, really matter. But we need to think of other things when we look at scale. So there are more things that people don't measure when they look at continuous integration. So stuff like feature cycle time from backlog to approval on stages. So how long does it take us from we had an idea, we explored it, we put it in the backlog, and until we've actually seen it running in real life? And again, this is, for example, Dennis, a connection to a business. It's a feature cycle time. I don't care here necessarily about the commits themselves. I want to connect the fact that I just showed it on a staging server and I finished this feature. But if I can't connect those two concepts, I've got nothing. How long does it take me from?
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Imbar.
No. You Dennis, go.
One of the things that a great opportunity that I think we all have on the DevOps portion of the value stream, there's so much data in DevOps and so many tools and so much talk about automation, and all that automation generates so much data. But with all of that, I think we're a little bit light in the ability of tracking how business value flows through DevOps, understanding where the bottlenecks are, understanding cycle time in each one of these important phases of delivery, and having you guys talk about that and just kind of get behind this idea, I think is really exciting. I think the ability to visualize and track and understand how value flows through, as you said, cycle time at any given phase, cycle time from commit to system demo or from system demo to solution demo. There are a number of different phases during DevOps, and understanding the cycle time in each one of them or across them is super important.
Yeah, and then seeing the cadence of demos. Are we doing demos every 2 weeks? Are we doing solution demos every PI? How is that working? How is integration working? measuring those things is really crucial. And we're doing all this work not just to do it. We're doing this work so that we can actually move ahead in the continuous delivery pipeline and start validating our hypothesis, which is when we start moving to continuous deployment. So I had an idea. I put it in the backlog. I worked on continuous integration. Now it's on a staging environment, and it has been validated. Now we need to deploy it to production. And there are many things that we've seen that actually matter when you do that. Stuff like having a development and test environment that better match production, maintaining a staging environment that emulates production, deploying to staging continuously, decoupling the deployment from the release. That means I can deploy something, but I don't release it to anyone. I can see how it's running on a server. I can see everything, but nobody gets to use it, and then maybe I'll release it incrementally. I can automate the deployment process and automate the process of actually deploying environments. I automate the testing of features non-functional. All of those things are crucial to deployment. And when we just released 4.5, we actually had a problem because our staging environment didn't precisely match production. So when we went live, we had some problems on the first few minutes of going live that we had to fix exactly because of those things. And I'm sure, Dennis, you've run into those problems before.
Yeah, I think especially in the enterprise world, there's a lot of talk in the DevOps community about the importance of having a staging environment match your production environment, or having your entire delivery stream emulate production, and that goes back to configuration as code and some of those kind of classic DevOps conversations. Based on our experience, especially in the enterprise, that's difficult because of the size and scale of legacy applications. And often just some of the cultural differences between the development process and the operate process. It's a challenge to have that kind of tight integration between a staging environment and a production environment. But we're seeing, certainly over the last 12 months, we've seen within our customers that become a priority, an important priority, and we're seeing a lot of progress being made in that environment parity. And it's great to hear you guys talking about that, and hopefully that will encourage and empower people to spend more time and energy, because as you say, you can't get to continuous delivery without that kind of environment parity.
Yeah, it's so crucial, and yet many people don't do it. I mean, a lot of people in some of the communities, and as you're moving on and talking to people in larger and larger scale organizations, you get to see that some of the things that we're taking for granted in a lot of places are just not granted, are just not easy. And so just looking at some simple metrics like how many deploys and release are we doing? We're seeing people, and they start to embrace this idea of continuous deployment and release on demand, they start moving to actually deploying more and more. Whether initially we deploy once a PI, we deploy once a year. So actually we deploy continuously. And it's really funny because when you're talking to some of the big organizations that are building not even software, systems, they have this understanding that they can't really do that. But then you're seeing, as an example, people like Tesla, who are doing over-the-air updates to the car software. And then you start talking to them that they can actually do stuff like that, and a lot of the time they won't even think that it's possible. And I'm not even talking about stuff like cars, or this could be automated vending machines or stuff like that. You can actually start taking those concepts back. And having those things are really important. And I really can't stress this enough.
So Inbar, you talk about deployments over time and how important that statistic is, and I think I totally agree with that. To me, that begs the question of definition of done, especially in an enterprise setting. There's a great, some of you guys may have read the Gartner post just a couple days ago on the definition of done, and I think that's really interesting. If you subscribe to Gartner, you should check that out. But the definition of done, I think, is a challenge in the enterprise when it's just not practical for business reasons to release. That cadence can't speed up for business reasons. Yet you talk about being able to release at any point. Doesn't mean you have to, and maybe how you release it into a staging environment. And so can you kind of talk about definition of done and how that works in a setting where you can't necessarily, because of business reasons, deploy more frequently, at least in the short term?
So first of all, let's talk a little bit about release. And one of the important things for us is really separating those two concepts. Even if you can release from a business perspective, because I don't want to disrupt the customers or I don't want to say something, it doesn't mean you can't deploy. A lot of the time you can deploy something but not turn it on. You can start testing stuff. You can have it ready there for whenever you will want to use it, as opposed to what we'll do the other way around, and then it could sit for a long time. I was just flying yesterday, and they had some kind of delay for weather, but they still got us on the plane, and they were telling us, we have some kind of delay, but we've notified everybody that we're on the plane and we're ready to embark. So whenever they're ready, we'll take that window. But if they weren't ready, if we weren't on the plane, they would just let us start embarking the plane when there was a window to actually fly. We would never fly. I want to push that thing to the business. I want to change the conversation from releasing any time to releasing on demand. I'll deploy. You'll tell me when you want it. You want it every year? And then don't even think about the whole thing. So, for example, we just released Safe 4.5. I can't release Safe 5.0 tomorrow morning. But can I go into an article and somebody was talking about typos, which somebody will find and they'll send to us at support@scaledagile.com and we'll fix. But I can just go in and fix them right now. Other things I can't. So as you start looking at your solution and something that you decouple into smaller chunks of value that I can deliver different times, subsystems that I can release, components that I can release, security fixes that I can do, we can actually do much more deployment and releasing than people think. And then we have to customize our definition of done for this. There's a what does it mean to be ready on the staging server? What does it mean to be deployed? And what does it mean to be released? These are different levels and different definitions of done, and they're dictated by different people in the organization. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think it highlights. I think that's a great point about the fact that there probably will not be a universal definition of done, especially in complex organizations. And that just highlights to me the importance of being able to understand cycle time and at each one of these phases. And different people in the organization will have different interests. But if you can measure it to each one of these stages or phases, I think that's important.
Exactly. And you should measure and let different people know what is interesting for them. So stuff around measurements. One of the things that as an example of the first thing we want to see is we want to see outages. We were talking about recovery earlier. We want to see when we had to roll back, for example, or when we had to do any kind of recovery. But then we want to overlay that with actual when did we do deployments and when did we do releases. Deployments are usually easy for a lot of organizations. A lot of organizations know how to do a deployment. But if you're looking at the release line, what does that mean? We just turned a toggle on. That could be something that we've done in our software. We just did something, and then we had to roll back. Or then we had to turn that toggle off. We need to measure that and really connect it to the business. And this could be an outage. Okay, we turned that on and the server fell. A lot of people are thinking that way. But what if that didn't happen? We turned it on and sales dropped by 50%. That's still important. It's a business metric that lets us know we did something bad. We have to roll back, although the technical measurements of things won't show us. But if we're not measuring the business data as we're doing releases, we might miss really important indicators that let us know that a deployment or a release or something that we've just turned on is causing harm to our business. And that's really, really, really crucial. So I think really having those kind of deployment and releasing information overlaid on top of recovering incidents is crucial.
Yeah, Imbar,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, just quickly. I think that's one of the real opportunities in DevOps or in software delivery overall is that feedback loop, and that's when we were talking earlier about metrics and objective, being able to describe hypotheses with objective measures. I think that it's going to really stimulate and motivate that feedback loop, and to your point, to be able to understand what's the business impact of this release and be able to quantify it in much more objective terms.
Yeah, and just seeing stuff in the Q&A, I just want to point out the dots here are the number of times we had to do recovery within time period, and then you can see the deployment to production and then the release on production. They're both being done on production. The identification of the staging environment, we usually do that already in continuous integration. We try to do that on a staging. Here, this is deployment to production. So, for example, this dot here shows you that within this time period, we had to do some kind of recovery, whether it's turning off a toggle or really rolling back something 3 times, whether at other times we had to do nothing. So this really shows us how many times we had to do something and how this overlays with deployment and releases. But we don't have to focus on the bad. We can also focus on the good. We were started by talking about continuous exploration. So we had a cool hypothesis. For example, we had an hypothesis that Safe 4.5 is the best thing since sliced bread. Is that right? We don't know. But as we start releasing those things, we can look at some things. And some of those things are going to be lagging indicators. We think that as people use Safe 4.5, we're going to see more successes with safe implementations. We're going to see better time to markets. We're going to see more customer successes. We're going to see more case studies that showcase Safe 4.5 and the things it shows as a success. Well, great. But that's a lagging indicator. What's a leading indicator? Well, a leading indicator could be how many people are actually showing up at the sites. Is there an increase in reading? What are they reading? Are they actually going and reading the new continuous delivery pipeline articles? Are they going in and looking at some of the things around it? Is there a lot of interest in our courseware? Is there a lot of interest in webinars like the ones we're doing now? Do we see? So we need to measure some of those early things. And we use innovation accounting for this. We need to measure real things, not hypes, not, I don't know, saying, yeah, how many people have actually tweeted about Safe 4.5? We can create probably a great marketing buzz, but if of those people hardly anybody goes and reads the new continuous delivery content, it's not going to drive any change. So we need to look at some of those leading indicators and overlay them with some of the things. So, for example, Safe 4.5 release, or releasing a guidance article on the front page. So we think that if we have more attention to guidance articles, this will drive more engagement with the guidance article. So how is that impacting? Are people reading them more? So really continuously looking at the processes, saying initially, how am I going to measure them? And then measuring those actual results as time goes by. So innovation accounting is the way to do it. It's a concept out of Lean Startup, which from Eric Ries, talking about the fact that we should be measuring real things, real leading indicators that will allow us to see whether our hypothesis is true or not. Okay. So we've just talked about the various aspects of continuous delivery. But we want to look at the overall thing. How do you measure the overall thing? And there are various things to look at. So this is, for example, an important thing for us, the program Kanban. Looking at a Kanban board that allows you to measure and visualize the flow of work from an idea to done. And by the way, done doesn't mean we're not doing it anymore. It could just mean we validated the hypothesis and now we're going to do more stuff. We need to measure this. And Dennis, I think you had some comments about the importance of actually doing WIP limits on the various stages of this Kanban board.
Yeah, so I have an experience with one of our customers who is really, this customer is very motivated and driven by WIP limits, and using WIP limits really what I would describe is more upstream, so maybe the left side of the slide that you have here. So they strongly believe that by reducing the WIP limits, they can increase the throughput. And I think they've proven that. I think they definitely have. They've identified their bottlenecks. They do a lot less context switching, and for all the reason that WIP limits are important, I think they've seen the benefits. But really, when we looked at it and when we started to expand the view, we widened a little bit to start to think more of the downstream work in progress. Really all that was happening is that value was stacking up at a later phase. It was out of the purview of the group that was very interested in accounting for it, but it really wasn't done, right? It wasn't being delivered. It was just pooling up in much larger chunks downstream. And what I love about this slide is it starts to get us thinking about understanding the flow of value across all phases of delivery and understanding what my work in progress is at any point in time, at any particular spot within that value stream. And so I love this slide in particular because I think that's really exciting.
And I think this is, to your point, it's really important because I've seen this too. And a lot of the time this happens with product management. You're always so excited with the idea of the new thing. So you've had an idea. You wrote it up. You had teams develop it. Cycle times are not that great yet. So by the time it actually gets to be deployed on production, you don't even turn it on. And we start seeing piles of stuff. And feature toggles, while they're a great thing, they're also a very dangerous and something that needs to be managed. So you see a lot of stuff staying on production, never being turned off, never being used, never being looked at, never being evaluated. Nobody goes back to the hypothesis to see, has it been proven? We just keep churning new features and new ideas, and putting a work in process limit, limiting the amount of things that can actually be throughout this, will force product management to actually say, okay, I can't push a new idea into this funnel until I actually go out and measure the effectiveness of my last idea that I released to the market. And this is really cool.
Imbar, I have another example that about a month ago, I was working with a customer that had made a lot of progress towards continuous delivery, and they were really they had advanced quite a ways using feature toggles. And in fact, their whole organization had switched to using feature toggles, and they developed a real competency around being able to toggle features on and off. And they measured their definition of done by when it was deployed in production yet toggled off. And so their reporting was great. The only way that a feature toggle in this case could be turned on is when the business approved it. And there was no real accounting for that. There's no real mechanism to force the business to approve it. In some cases, the business were just nervous or maybe they had moved on. And so when we started identifying and accounting for the work in progress that was deployed yet toggled off, it created a huge sense of urgency around the business, and it created real change. And to your point, the development team essentially started saying, we're not going to do it, we can't do any more work until we work down this work in progress in the delivered toggled off. And so that's another great example that I think highlights your point.
Yeah, that's a great example, Dennis, because this really drives to the point that until we've released it, really released it, and until we validated it, we have no idea. And we keep always shining to the cool, the things that are new. And we have a very good and agile development organization, and until we make the entire continuous delivery pipeline agile and lean, we're not going to see the full results. And you were talking about the concept of bottlenecks. Well, stuff like cumulative flow diagrams across the entire continuous delivery pipeline. Where are the bottlenecks? Are we developing the hypothesis on time? Are we integrating on time? Or as you were just saying, maybe things are piling up either in deployment or maybe even in release. Things are piling up. Those features are piled up. They're there. They're deployed to production. We did all our stuff, but they just keep piling up. Well, we'll see this here very clearly. That section of the cumulative flow diagram will just expand and expand and expand, and this will force us to stop and start fixing stuff.
And we've leveraged cumulative flow diagrams in the Agile world for quite a while. I think the innovation here is bringing this idea of a cumulative flow diagram all the way to the definition of done, or at least to delivered value. And I think that's going to really, I think over the next 6 to 12 months, as people start thinking that way, it's going to really identify some new bottlenecks and some new opportunities.
I hope you're right. I think this could really change thinking. And then as you look at, you were talking about value streams, the flow of value from idea to cash. As you look at the entire flow of value, and as you get more automated and as you get more rigorous about your process, you can start really talking about various things. So one of the things that Lean has always talked about is the concept of value stream mapping. Really taking your value stream, creating a current map of what are the different steps, what is the touch time, the time we're actually working on something, as opposed to the wait times, things that it's been deployed but it's waiting for the business to approve it, or it's been developed and it's waiting for someone to deploy it, or it's been thought of and it's waiting for someone to actually develop it, but no work gets done. So actually looking at the entire stages of the workflow and looking at the difference between touch time and wait time, how long and how much waste do we have in waiting, is another very crucial element. And Dennis, I think you have some experience around measuring those things.
Yeah, so that's if in the DevOps world, we think of efficiency as a really strong indicator of bottlenecks and where there are opportunities. And so, and efficiency is a concept that's been around. And I remember the conversation we had about this back in January in Boulder that I think was really helpful for us. But this whole idea of efficiency, which is made up a combination of touch time and wait time. The good news is we started to really dig into this and figure out how to build it into our software. You only have to calculate if you know the cycle time at any given phase. So in this example, we've got the phases of analyzing and backlog and implementing and et cetera. If you know the cycle time in any given phase, the good news is to calculate efficiency, you only need to understand either wait time or touch time. You can derive the other. So if you know the total time you stayed at a phase, and you know, for example, the touch time, you can calculate the wait time. And it turns out that touch time for us, based on our experience, touch time is much easier to calculate. And so by tracking the cycle time and then tracking the touch time, and not just touch time of automation, I think in the DevOps world we assume that the only stuff that matters is the stuff that we've automated. The vast majority of opportunity, based on our experience, a future opportunity is in the manual processes. And in fact, the vast majority of touch time is in manual processes, and that's where our opportunity is. So tracking the touch time of both automated and manual processes is important. And once you have that, and if you know how long, if you solve this rogue commit problem and you can track value as it moves through phases in an automated way, then you can start really understanding efficiency. And we find it's not uncommon for us, especially depending on the batch size or the work in progress at any given phase, it's not uncommon for us to see a 95% wait time. And when you start producing metrics like that, it makes it a lot easier for leadership to acquire funding and resources to solve problems when you can start to really objectively measure opportunities and what the anticipated benefit is. So having this kind of information, I think will change the way people think about how value streams work, and DevOps in particular. And that's why I think that 4.5 is more than a half a point release. I think it's a full point.
I think that the reason we think of it as a point release is because it's backward compatible, and a lot of people can actually use it without going through an extensive retraining. But I agree, some of those changes are important. We've talked about value stream mapping for a long time. But when people go and try to do that experiment and try to put touch time and wait time, they don't know. But when we're starting to measure the cycle time for each phase, and actually sometimes we can actually know the touch time from an automation perspective because it's a tool. Sometimes we need to actually think about how long we've spent doing it. And that doesn't mean we have to go and log every hour that we do. There are many ways to do it manually or just looking back. But as you're saying, you can just take those two concepts and deduce the wait time, and then really draw value from your value stream mapping. And then finally, we start with culture, and I want to end with culture and various other things. We look at teams and agile release trains as a whole, and we've always had this concept of a self-assessment. And I can't stress the self enough here. For a team to self-assess how it's progressing in the agile journey, and for an art. And one of the things we've taken and beefed this thing up with more questions around how a team and an art is doing from a continuous delivery perspective. And some of the questions there have to do with technical things. Are we automating more, or are we measuring the right things? But some of the questions are culture questions. Are we working with? Is X, who is downstream from me, actually involved in my processes? Am I involved in his? Do I have a responsibility? Am I a developer and then he's an operation guy? Or is he responsible for working with me on the development and I'm responsible downstream for things that are actually going to deployment and release? So those kind of thinking, which tie technical and cultural aspects, also made an appearance here and changed some of our radars that we do around assessing the agility level of teams and trains. Dennis, I think you have a survey here.
Yeah, so our last survey question is a really easy one. So just if you would like to learn more about how version 1 supports SAFe 4.5 or SAFe in general, certainly click yes, and we'll make that process easy for you. And as we're collecting some data there quickly, we have some upcoming webinars. You go to our website, we've got a SAFe Made Simple webinar that's coming up, and we also have measuring DevOps performance with version 1. Those are coming up. So
SAFe Made Simple, I'm guessing it's not with me because I'm on the framework team, so I'm just making it more complicated all the time.
All right. Let's. Of course, you can go to version 1/SAFe to learn more about how we're supporting Inbar and Dean and all that's going on over at Scaled Agile. And to find out what webinars we have coming up, you can go to version 1/Agile Live. So Inbar, we have some really good questions, and I saw this one when it popped in, and I've been really excited about passing it off to you. So the question is, my team is reluctant to build out metrics as they fear measurements will be used against them. How do I address this when it has happened in the past? I think that's a great question.
It is a great question. And one of the things to understand, and that's why if you look at the SAFe, one of the things that we've made really public in SAFe 4.5 is our implementation roadmap. And we start by training executives and leaders because we need them to understand what happens when they do their behavior. Sometimes leaders will really use the metrics against people just because they don't know. Sometimes they know. But I don't think a lot of the time they understand the destructiveness of what they're doing. A lot of the time, somebody will go in. I remember a long time ago I was working with an executive, and the team had a burn down chart. Really good, normal burn down chart. That executive came into the room and said, why isn't it going down at a 45 degrees angle? So it started going down at a 45 degrees angle, making it completely useless. He just had no idea how to approach those kind of questions. I think one of the important things to understand is that there's a lot of coaching. And a lot of leaders think that or don't really trust their teams, but they don't understand how much distrust there is on the team to them. And leaders have a responsibility to actually start building this culture of trust by actually asking people to measure, showing that the bad news that comes in is being received as, thank you for telling me this, I'll help you solve it, as opposed to, oh, now I know how you're misbehaving. And then as it starts building that culture of trust, then you can measure more. But if you've already heard that trust because it's happened before, it's a gradual process.
So the next question is help. What's the difference between continuous integration and continuous deployment?
Continuous integration, continuous deployment. Again, that's a good question, and we needed to come up with some concepts and some definitions. One of the things when you're creating a framework is you need to have language. So we're calling continuous delivery the entire flow of value from idea to cash. Continuous exploration is the concept where you come up with an hypothesis. Continuous integration is when you really build it and validate it on a staging environment. Continuous deployment is when you actually deploy it to the production environment. And then release on demand is when you turn it on for some or all of the users.
Yeah, I think that covers it. I'll go on to this next question. I think I know what you're going to say, but what is the ideal WIP limit during sprint execution while generating value?
That's the best question if you're one of our coaching partners, because the answer is it depends. I can't give an optimal WIP limit, which is why these are all examples. When you try to understand a WIP limit, the way the Lee thinks about it is they sometimes call it the problem of the stone to the lakes. If everything is flowing and it's never hitting the WIP limit, it's too high. If it's always hitting the WIP limit, then currently it's too low. You can start solving it, but it doesn't help you because what will happen if it's constantly being stopped at the WIP limit is people will just bypass it mechanically. You want to start reducing your WIP limit to a place where they will occasionally hit the WIP limit, indicating that there is a bottleneck, letting you solve for that and letting you subjugate the entire system to that WIP limit. But it really depends. It depends on the size of the team. It depends on what's going on. It depends on the amount of work. It depends on the batch size that you can handle. So it really depends.
And especially in the world of DevOps, a lot of the writing over the last, especially over the last 5 years, has really focused on real-time continuous delivery, and that's so difficult to achieve in enterprise environment. And that kind of DevOps culture really pushes towards a WIP limit of 1. Which means every single build, for example, is potentially deployable. And that's just so hard for people to even think about. For a lot of our customers, they're not there yet. And there are a lot of institutional barriers that are keeping them from being at WIP limit of 1. So I think the ideal WIP limit is, increasingly just whatever we can do to increasingly to reduce our overall WIP limit, not WIP at any particular phase, but our overall WIP limits to increasingly move towards 1 at any given phase over time. So as we're making progress, I think is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and I agree with that. We just need to remember that one-piece flow is an ideal, not necessarily something we need to be at, because as we're people, and as we're working in global environments, and as we need some kind of queue so that there's something waiting for me to work on in case somebody is sick or just want to take a vacation, but it's still allowed. So you don't necessarily keep it at 1, but this is an ideal. If I want it at 1, to send a message of things should be moving through the process continuously.
Yeah, and I certainly didn't mean to apply. I totally agree. I
think,
of course. The single piece flow is just it almost creates it's an ideal. It's just that.
Yep.
All right. So there are a couple more questions here. We just have another minute. Here's a good question. How do we reconcile the short feedback cycles with long-term PI planning?
So we need to really differentiate between the two. PI planning is meant for actually building alignment between a lot of teams. And this actually assists each other. So in the PI planning, we will actually build the integration points, and we will actually integrate with building more knowledge. And this depends on the environment. For example, when we were working on 4.5, there were some unknowns there. We needed PI planning to even get to a point, but we've set a point mid-PI where we've scheduled what we call the mid-PI review, where we came in as a team, looked at our progress, looked at our learning, looked at the feedback we got from people, and then said, do we need to change our PI plan? If we do, is it a small change? Is it something that's like a tweak, or do we need to go back to the team and have them do some kind of replanning? And some of the teams actually had to go in and do some replanning, and we aligned that around our review process and around the scrums. But if we hadn't even done the PI planning to begin with, we would never have understood that we have those unknowns, and we couldn't have identified a point in time and the things we needed to do until then across the groups to actually arrive at the right knowledge at that point.
So, Imbar, unfortunately, we have a lot more really awesome questions, but we have no more minutes. And so, for those of you that have questions that are unanswered, Imbar and I will work together to make sure you guys get answers. And so we'll definitely respond to those outstanding questions. And that's all I have. Imbar, do you have anything else?
No, I just wanted to say thank you for hosting me. It was a fun conversation. I love talking about this, and I really encourage people to go into scaledataframework.com, read some of those articles, the metrics article, the continuous delivery pipeline articles, and send us feedback, both of typos you find, but more importantly about things that are interesting to you, things that you find really motivating, and successes that you have within your own enterprise.
And Inbar, I would like to thank you for taking time to be with us today, but also thank you guys, all of you guys, for the amount of collaboration and for the work that we've been able to do together over these last 6 or 7 months. And it's been really interesting, and we've benefited a lot from our interaction with you guys. And so thanks for showing up. Thanks for I know you had a lot of long journey yesterday, so thanks for taking the time to do this today.
Of course. And thank you for all the information and feedback you provided. As we're saying, part of the thing is validating our hypothesis. You guys were part of the group that helped us validate our hypothesis.
Well, so we're all officially thanked. Thanks to all the people that showed up for this webinar, and that's it.
Thank you so much.